Burke Teichert is back, and we're going to talk to him about some of the commonalities of successful ranches and their managers. For example,
you're going to be more profitable most of the time if you buy replacement cows and breed them to a terminal bull.
We're also going to talk to him about the importance of pursuing excellence.
You know, in this pursuit, perfection is an impossibility, but excellence is not.
What actually is leadership?
If it's not voluntary, it's not leadership. Pushership, coercion, I don't know what you might call it, but it's not leadership.
And the how and why of waging war on costs.
The ranches that I see that make the most progress the fastest in profitability are the ones that just bite that bullet. They just say, hey, we've got overheads, we've got stuff here we do not need, let's be rid of it. But why do we have to wage war on costs? Well, because people don't have to eat meat. They're probably going to die young, but they don't have to eat meat. And if they do eat meat, it doesn't have to be beef. I don't want to imagine life on chicken, but it doesn't have to be beef.
All that and more on this episode 427 of the Working Cows Podcast, brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited, as always, to welcome back Burke Teichert. Probably needs no introduction to many of you, but he has been a successful ranch manager of many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of acres over the years. And that breadth of experience has given him some idea of how and why and what are the commonalities and the essentials of successful ranch managers. And so we're going to talk to him about that today on the Working Cows Podcast, right after a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. As farmers and ranchers, we've all heard pitches from ag consultants about the next great new product that will increase our yields, pounds, or animal performance. And each of those silver bullets comes with a price tag that you pay year after year, taking more money out of your pockets and putting it into someone else's. Our friends at Understanding Ag aren't out to sell you anything but the knowledge to grow healthier soils, plants, animals, and profits. Their goal is to help you become your own best manager, a short-term client, but a long-term friend and partner on the road to regeneration. If you're still waiting for that next year that's going to be better, maybe it's time you give Understanding Ag a call. Check them out at understandingag.com. I know you'll be glad you did. Burke, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and really excited for the topic today, the 5 essentials for successful ranch management. What are some of the ways that you've come to understand these to be the essentials? How did you arrive at these as the essentials?
That's a good question. Seriously, a good question. I was asked to give a talk a good number of years ago and to list 10 things that I thought had helped me the most as a manager. And I made my list of 10, gave my talks a number of times, actually, in kind of a round-robin speaking engagement in Kansas. Talks were well received, and I was asked to give the talks again. As I was doing that, I consolidated that list of 10 to these 5. And now, just over the course of time, I'm just convinced they are the 5 essentials of successful ranch management, that they're not hows necessarily, but they're what you need to consider, what you need to be thinking of as you approach management.
No, that's very good. I'm excited to hear. So let's dive in to what are the 5.
The first is the approach must be both integrative and holistic. Number 2, you need to strive for continuous improvement of the key resources, which on most ranches is land, livestock, and people. And you need to use good planning and decision-making tools. We need to wage war on cost, and we need to place an emphasis on marketing.
Yeah, that that does cover it pretty well. Do you remember what some of the others that got lumped in were?
Well, for example, continuous improvement of the key resources, there was one for each: land, livestock, and people. So I just kind of did that sort of thing. I don't
Well, you went
remember.
from
I just
7 to 5 right there, right?
right. Yeah, I don't remember just exactly what they were, but use of good planning and decision-making tools was bigger than that. War on cost, I think, was a little bigger than that. So
Sure. That gets you there pretty quick. So,
yeah.
yeah, let's dive into these on an individual basis. The first one you listed was the approach must be both integrative and holistic. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
And I have thought since, that that's really important. And today, a lot of people talk about systems approaches to management. And I don't care if we use the term holistic or systems. It seems like the biologists tend to use the word holistic a lot more. The business people tend to use the word systems more. There probably are subtle differences, but I don't want to argue the semantics. And let's just say a holistic approach or a systems approach, and that is enabled by integration. In other words, until we become a good integrator, putting bits and pieces together, we're not going to be a very good holistic thinker or a very good systems thinker, because we have to get good at bits and pieces, a piece at a time. We become a good animal breeder, we become a good range manager, we become a good marketer, etc. And then these things all link together.
Yeah, for sure. There are a bunch of people who have kind of seen the pendulum swing in the way that we've been breeding cattle over the years and have really started to pay attention to, hey, what kind of cows work in our environment and breeding for that and succeeding in it. But one of the things that I notice is that many of them do not focus as much on the grazing and on the range side. And so would that be an example of somebody who's maybe not integrated? They're focused on the genetics, but maybe not on the range?
Yeah, I've just put up here on the screen some examples of this. Cattle size and growth rate. For years we pushed weaning weight, and we didn't hardly recognize that while we were doing that, cow size was getting bigger and bigger, and then we had to run fewer of them on the same resource or buy in more supplemental feed or whatever. And the same with milking ability, as we asked them to give more milk, and that was big on, EPD, the push for milk EPDs, higher and more milk. We weren't understanding that was probably impairing fertility. We were probably asking the cow to do more than the resource on which she was running was capable of supporting. And we just weren't linking the pieces together and asking the what if questions. I could go through the others on here, but the timing of your calving season has that kind of an effect. We have to think if we change the calving season, we'll most likely have to change our marketing. We might need to change our grazing management, that sort of thing. And then I get to things like wormers and insecticides. Uh, if I start to worm my cattle, I have taken away my ability to select for worm and parasite resistance. And if I don't worm, hey, the worms and insects are probably going to have a negative effect on my performance. But if I cull the animals that don't breed as a result of that, and then if my grazing management can be helpful in that, a lot of other things can be helpful in parasite resistance and parasite avoidance. And if we can use those other tools, but we need to learn what's going on. If I'm working for the cattle, I've removed my ability to select for those that have resistance because we've just taken away the problem. But pretty soon, the insects, the bugs, the worms, they all start developing their resistance to the parasiticides. And then we have a race between the chemical companies and the parasites. Who's going to win this race?
I think the bugs will.
Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that when we talk about being a holistic thinker or a systems thinker that we want to talk about.
Yeah, very good. And the integrative piece of that is it's similar or the same thing that we're just thinking about it in a holistic way, or is there more to it?
The integrated pieces, we learn the bits and pieces. We learn about parasite resistance, for example, and we learn about good cattle breeding. We learn about good grazing management, what And then how do those interact with each other?
Yeah.
And it's the interaction part that brings us to systems.
Yeah.
And then I've listed a thing here, major determinants of profit. The winning weight's not on there because it always comes with a cost. And sometimes the cost might be justified, but sometimes it's not justified too. But these things are big hitters. Your enterprise mix and choices, and I wish I had time, but I don't have time to go into them in much detail, unless you're just asking me a lot of questions about them. But enterprise mix and choices. Cow-calf is probably the least profitable choice if you raise, cow-calf where you raise your own replacement heifers is probably the least profitable choice of even the the cattle enterprises.
So to make cow-calf more profitable, would you suggest a terminal bull and buying replacements that
You're going to be more profitable most of the time if you buy replacement cows and breed them to a terminal bull, high growth, high carcass, Angus, Charolais, whatever. The only way a maternal breeder can compete with that is if they can develop heifers at a low cost and sell bred cows at a nice premium. But most maternal breeders don't do that. You have that yearling year where you get no coupon to clip, and the animal is appreciating in value, but we never take advantage of the appreciation because we keep the cow until she is no longer functional for us, and then we sell her at a cull cow price.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful.
And then there are what I call the major determinants of profit, which we just briefly talked about. Enterprise mix and choices, overheads, stocking rate, and we'll get into that in a little more detail here in a little bit, but these things are all part of your systems approach, and they interact with each other so much.
Yeah.
All these items that I've listed here interact with each other so much, and with the things that I've presented previously, these things, they interact with those, and they're interacting with each other, and that's why we need to be a holistic or a systems thinker. So I'm saying for profitable decision making, become a systems thinker. Learn how to be integrative and then holistic. So you think, you plan, you execute, and observe. And after you observe, then you adjust or adapt holistically because your observation is going to tell you weren't perfect.
Do you think that the key here is just to change your mindset and how you're seeing and thinking about the resources you're managing?
It certainly is. To change your mindset. Right.
Yep. It's not, there isn't necessarily a course that you can take to learn to be a systems thinker. It's just knowing this is all connected and I need to recognize that a change here is going to affect other things too, is kind of the.
Yes. You have to conscientiously work at becoming a systems thinker. The King Ranch Institute teaches a course on that, on systems thinking, and I think it's pretty good, in fact, but you're not a ready-made systems thinker, and some people are more naturally inclined to that than others. It's hard for some people to envision that 2 plus 2 might only equal 3, or that 2 plus 2 might equal 5, 6, or 7. And, in systems thinking, as you start putting pieces together, you recognize that either of those could happen.
Yeah. This is where people talk about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly.
Yeah. The second one you mentioned was the continuous improvement of the key resources of land, livestock, and people. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, if you can have these three improving all the time, and let's underground, there's things come along. Drought, your land is going to improve. It's going to be slower or maybe even non-existent for a little while. Livestock, you might have some upsets in animal health or something. People, so you can have some disruptions there. But if basically you can have continuous improvement of those, your profitability is going to continually improve. And to me, it's just that simple.
Yeah.
It ought to be obvious, right? That if those are improving, you just ought to be getting better in every aspect. Your profitability, your lifestyle, everything ought to be getting better.
This isn't the only strategy, but probably the most common strategy in improving livestock and people is to cull the ones that don't fit. And that might be harsh to say about people, but that's the way it has to be sometimes.
That's the way it is.
Yep. So the land,
let's jump on the land first. And I think adaptive multi-paddock grazing is the way to go. And it's characterized by short graze periods followed by lengthy recovery periods, and short and long are determined by climate, rainfall, and a whole bunch of other things. For example, one ranch, northeastern Utah. It's a year plus since the last graze here. It takes that long for plants to recover there. Now, the riparian area right there in the foreground, yeah, you could probably fence that out by itself, but it's small. You wouldn't do it and graze it twice in the same year some years. But the stuff in the background on the side hill there where the sagebrush is, it's going to be yellow in a month, even if the cattle weren't there. So next year, I'm going to graze it later than this year, and I'm going to give it the full year so it can fully recover and not graze it at the same time again so that when those plants want to be growing, they have their chance to grow without being grazed. Now, same ranch, but under irrigation, I my graze periods are much shorter, my recovery periods are much shorter, so I'm changing. That's why one of the reasons we call it adaptive.
Yeah.
Okay. And it will improve the land or the soil with improved carrying capacity, greater stocking rate. Carrying capacity being the supply, stocking rate being the demand. Never let the stocking rate outrun the carrying capacity. It just forces overgrazing.
That's one of the things that I keep hearing, especially from the guys at Understanding Ag, is that the vast majority, and I think the number they've used is 95% of the ranches that they consult on are overstocked.
I think at the beginning, many of them are. I would echo what Alan and Savory said, though, early on, is that many ranches are understocked and overgrazed at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because we don't do any grazing management, essentially. We turn cattle out, and so there's plants that are never grazed and plants that are grazed way excessively. Once we get that right, I think most ranches actually, even now, are understocked and overgrazed. But to get to where we can be, to where we avoid the overgrazing, we probably have to reduce stock initially a little bit. Now, in ranches that I've managed, we haven't had to do that. We're careful how we moved into better grazing management, and we had to destock if we had drought. But if we didn't have drought, we didn't have to destock.
Yeah, I've taught my children some of these concepts over the years, of course, and so we'll drive around, and my younger ones especially will ask from the back seat, "Are those people overgrazing or undergrazing?" And I'll say both. Always, if they're there for more than a couple of weeks or a month, obviously they're doing both at the same time. They're overgrazing around the water points. They're undergrazing in the corners. They're not getting out to the edges of the field, the paddock, and so that's kind of the way it goes.
I think until our graze periods, especially during growing season, are 5 days or less, we're probably doing some overgrazing.
Can you talk to me about how you think?
And then if our recoveries aren't long enough, we come back too quick, we're overgrazing there too.
Right. Yep. Can you talk to me about how you think about matching labor with the more intensive rotations, whether or not where we're still profitable, paying our people a living wage and more intensively grazing?
As we've moved into more grazing intensity, the cattle are not scattered all over the ranch. They're in one place. And we make our herds as large as we can make them, as our water will allow. So water development oftentimes precedes fencing and all that sort of thing. But by having fewer herds and larger herds, that just enables one person to take care of a lot more cattle. And so if there's fencing issues and things like that, your work is where it is, and you're just working ahead of yourself with fencing and, in some cases, stock water development and that sort of thing. And so it becomes fairly simple. And we'll look at something in a minute. Cows per man ratio is really important. We'll talk about that more in depth here in a few minutes, but that's how you achieve it. Fewer herds, larger herd size. Greatly simplifies your labor.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the Soil Health Academy. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show. And many of those experts are farmer-rancher instructors for the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multi-species and marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself. So visit www.soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. Along these lines, as far as the land is concerned, what are some of the principles that we want to keep in mind for improving the land?
Well, these 6 principles of soil health. Know your context. I don't have much time to talk about this. So if people want to understand this, they should come to one of our workshops or academies and learn them in detail. But know your context, because no two places are alike. And you want your practices to obey the principles in your context. And I showed two extremes there on one ranch: irrigated pastures and the non-irrigated. And that happens from climate to climate. So that's why you want to start with your context. But then we want minimal disturbance. We want cover or armor on the soil surface. We just know that we're going to get more water in the ground if we've got the ground covered. Less evaporation, better infiltration. Diversity: the wider and the more diverse we can be in plants, animals, insects, birds, wildlife, soil microbes, all of that, the more diversity we can have, the healthier the soil is going to be. And there's just so much proof of that by now that that's just the way it is. You want living and functional roots in the soil for as much of the year as possible. You'd like the root to be alive, and you'd like it to function during as much of the year as possible. So if we can do things to moderate soil temps so that it gets warmer quicker in the spring, stays warmer later in the fall, so it doesn't get so hot in the heat of summer, those are things we want to do. And then we want to integrate animals into cropping systems. If we can do that, we have learned that we can make progress faster in the soil health of the cropping systems if we can integrate animals. It doesn't mean you have to, but it sure happens faster and better. And then there are these 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. Compounding. There's compounding and cascading things. They're never neutral. It's either taking you backward or forward, but you make a management change, and then compounding events begin to happen. Like I say, they're never neutral. And then the law of disruption. We're just learning more and more that if we can disrupt our practices, nature provides some of that, but if we can have planned disruptions, paddock size and shape are different, maybe every time we go there. The length of our recovery time may vary from one graze to the next. The stock density, how many cattle do we put on an acre, so to speak, pounds per acre. That can all be changed and modified, and we're learning that those disruptions are good. And I think what they're doing is it's telling the system, hey, this could happen again, and it could happen a bigger way. Let's get ready for this. Let's learn how to. And I think it makes the system. What's the word I want to say? It makes it so I can't think of the word I need right now, but it just makes the system more sustainable over time. And then
does it do that by stretching it or making it, kind of taking it to its limit and then giving it a chance to recover and come back?
Yeah, it takes it places it hasn't been before and gets it ready for that.
Yep.
Resilient was the word I was wanting to find. It makes the system more resilient to other changes that may come in the future. And then we need diversity, and diversity is just such a powerful tool. If you'll notice, we had it back in the 6 principles.
Yeah.
And then when we go to 4 ecosystem processes, succession or community dynamics, that we've got it there again.
Yep.
And so in this slide, what I'm saying is practices that are built on 6 principles of soil health and 3 rules of adaptive stewardship will improve the effectiveness of the 4 ecosystem processes. And I got to say that again because it's important. Your practices are built on, or they align with, or they obey, if I might even say that, the 6 principles of soil health and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. Then they'll improve the effectiveness of the ecosystem processes, make them
And
all function better. Water
and
cycle, mineral cycle, sunlight energy flow, succession or community dynamics. And that's a course in and of itself, so we won't give that course today, but
yeah, and this is the understanding eggs bread and butter, right? The 634. We've done episodes on it. They'll be linked in the show notes page for today. You can find them there. But were these things that you kind of were recognizing throughout your ranch management career, and then and then kind of they synthesized it, understanding ag synthesized it, and you said, yes, I've seen that. I've seen those processes at work, those rules at play, and this is how we improve them.
I became aware of the four ecosystem processes many years ago, and that what we did managerially could have an effect on those. But I didn't, and I've got to thank a lot of mentors over the years and people that formed my thoughts and ability to see and understand. But until I met Gabe Brown, I didn't really understand the six principles of soil health. I mean, I sort of understood some of them, but I didn't link them all together and put them together in that format and begin to work at it that way. And that's increased my understanding of what I previously knew, but it's also taken me further down the road, and being a lifelong learner and understanding it better all the time. In this pursuit, perfection I think is an impossibility, but excellence is not. We can do an excellent job of managing and still be quite a way short of perfection. We're just going to be much better than our fellow ranchers out there that they're staying with the old methods, with the old conventional methods.
Yeah, very good. I really appreciate that.
Just a few quick examples. Southeast Montana, I don't have time to talk about that, but over a period of years, they doubled their stocking rate. They went from 30 acres per cow to 16. And they said, we know we doubled it because we're feeding less hay in the wintertime and the cows are a little bigger. So we know we're able to double our stocking rate. And they were turning on to pastures like this all the time, with just excellent feed in front of them. In Missouri, started out with, there's not a leaf on the tree in the background, and yet look at the grass those critters are eating. As I left there, and I was wishing I had talked to him earlier about it, I saw nothing but farms that looked like a putting green. Well, and I just got thinking, I'll bet those people are wondering how much money Steve spends on fertilizer to have grass like that at this time of year. And I can tell you, the only fertilizer that this gets what comes out of the back end of those cows.
Yeah,
and it's just an amazing thing. And these are first calf heifers about ready to calve, but when they first started there, it was taking over 6 acres to run a cow-calf pair. Now it takes about 1.9. That's a pretty wonderful change. Now, as you do that kind of stuff, to quote Einstein, you should look for what is and not what you think should be. We have to, even in my position, and consultants with Understanding Ag, we've got to be very careful as we guide people, the people on the land. Okay, we're building some expectations, but let's not let our wishful thinking distort our ability to observe. And then look for what really is and not what we think should be. I mean, we gotta hope that we'll get to what we think should be, but let's be realistic in our observation.
This is connected to the importance of having a team, because you are going to have somebody who tends to be the more visionary. And then you're going to have somebody who tends to be the one who's boots on the ground and says, no, this is where we're at today. So rein it in. We got to deal with what we're doing today. And then we can dream about tomorrow some other time. So
exactly. And then I like the saying there below, and I borrowed it from somebody and then I added a little to it, but because the parts of a system are interacting, and the parts can be plants, bugs, insects, birds, etc., because they're interacting, behavior of a particular part, when included in a whole system, may not be what is expected based on the behavior it would exhibit in isolation. Research trials where they'll plant cultivars of a plant one at a time, and then they'll mix mix them and put them together, and the mixed ones always outperform the individuals by themselves, but the plants don't necessarily perform the same way in the mix or in the whole system as they do individually, and we've got to be aware of that and watch for that. A couple more examples. April in Mississippi just plant a lot of covers for green feed in the spring. They're south of the fescue belt, so fescue can't work there for them. That just kind of make your own salad out of that, couldn't you? That's what they're growing with some cover crops, and this is Birdwell Clark in Texas, do amazing things. They run like up to 6,000 head of stalkers, depending on the year, in a group. Move them multiple times a day, and people say, "Gosh, doesn't that take a lot of labor when you're moving them that often?" And they'll tell you it takes a lot less labor than it did to have them scattered out in 20 or 30 pastures across the ranch and having to check each one of those each day, make sure they were watered and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, and in a lot of those situations, how many you put in a given place is dependent on how much water that place produces a lot of times. And so you end up, like you said, you can go everywhere just trying to check them all.
Yeah, and they're all in one place.
Right.
If they should escape and get out, you don't have far to go together and back up. But once you know how to electric fence, cattle don't escape.
Right. Yep.
This is in Wyoming. He did some herding to graze the yearlings on that in the wintertime to place them, and that worked pretty effectively. He's an excellent stockman, so he knows how to do that. Doesn't do it in the summertime because he's got too many other things to do, but in the wintertime, he trains horses and he also trains dogs, and he can move those cattle and put them where he wants them, and they'll stay there. But this was, again, with cattle placing in the wintertime. This particular slide, they have not grazed it and won't till a little later in the spring, but you'll notice the new green is coming amongst the old. And I love to be able to graze the new green when I still have stockpile from the previous year. I think the plant management, the diet quality is just a lot better when they can mix the two. They don't get all runny and squirty, and they might for a first day or two when they see green, but when they first start chasing it, but they get over that pretty quickly. I think they know they feel better when they mix their diet. And this example of that, the pasture on the left was grazed late in the previous summer. And so you don't see much old residual forage. The new's coming along nice. On the right, that had been stockpiled, and they're back. Actually, the cattle were in there as I took this picture, but they'd kind of left this area. And you see the new green is trying to grow, but there was old stuff for them to graze while they were grazing the green. Same effect. Looking at two sides of the fence, one that's been grazed, and these are water tanks they can move, and so they'll leapfrog two of those. And if they don't have a lot of fencing done yet for the rotational grazing, they will only activate one water at a time, leapfrog these tanks, and so they can hold the cattle that way a little better. They had coal bed methane development there, so there was pipelines under the ground in many places, and so getting water where they needed it was pretty easy, but getting the fencing to catch up with their water development was not as easy. And so they were using herding and placement that way in the wintertime, and then leapfrogging their stock tanks in the wintertime.
Yeah, shout out to Shane Barber, who makes those tanks, Barber Industries.
Yeah, that's a Barber tank.
Yep. So how well do you? So a lot of ranches I end up working on will have way more water, actually, way more tanks than they have paddocks. How well does it work to just turn on water in one area, turn off the water everywhere else, if the water system can keep up with the demand to localize the grazing?
If you're feeding any salt and mineral, or in the wintertime, any protein, if you will move that along with the attractant, along with the water, not that you place them in the same places, but, in the area you want to move to, it's not perfect, but it can be pretty darn good.
I've often thought if you just went out there, those cows are going to be there for a month anyways. So if you just went out there every week and turned off one tank and turned on another one and moved the salt over to the other one, I thought you'd probably get a lot better utilization. Exactly.
Just watch what's happening. Again, good grazing is really observation dependent. And, but once your observation skills are good, you'll know when to move them. Yeah. It's like I say, it's not perfect, but it can be a whole lot better than nothing.
Right. Then turning on all 10 tanks
Just
in the
turn it out
paddock
on
at
the whole
one time.
pasture, leave them there
Right.
for
A month.
6 weeks.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
Yeah. That was the land. Now we get to livestock. I got to be pretty brief, but cows selected for this. Showed this in Georgia, and they said, we don't have this in Georgia. And I said, no, but you've got the two or 3 months of the year that are the toughest for your cattle.
Yeah.
Select cows that fit that.
Yeah.
And these cows look body condition pretty good, and that's what they're eating. With a little alfalfa hay fed as a protein supplement, maybe 3 days a week, either 2 days or 3 days a week. And so you select them for that. And then and how do you select for that? You color right cow. If they're open or dry, naturally they're culled. If they require individual attention or help, if I have to assist a birth, if I have to doctor them, they're going to be culled. If they're wild, I'm going to cull them. Poor calf, raise a poor calf. I don't identify the calves very often. At weaning time, all the poor calves, I set them aside. Let the good calves go one way and pull a sort the poor calves. And I mean, poor is poor. And the next morning, I just maybe dump those calves back out with the cow herd. And I can be there horseback. And as soon as they man me up, I just take the pair and then I get that cow marked. And so the next time there's a good opportunity to market that kind of cow, she's going to be sold, won't be there again. So I don't have to weigh the calves and go through all that trouble and a lot of ingenuity. I mean, it's just quick and easy to do. Select the right bull. And I'm saying be really careful. I want moderate size and moderate milk. I think most ranches have more milk than they should have for their environment. And then you want excellent cow fertility.
How do you find that out? How do you find excellent cow fertility? Is there an EPD you can look at, or is it call them up and say, hey, I want a bull that was born in the first cycle from a cow that was born in the first cycle from a grand dam that was born how do you do that?
There's a lot of people trying to predict cow fertility one way or another. Bright people are doing good work, but I do not think there's an EPD that works for cow fertility. I'll be honest with you. I think you let Mother Nature and the bull tell you if the cow's fertile. She gets pregnant as a yearling and then gets rebred as a 2-year-old. I say I like them if they get pregnant as a yearling early, and if they get pregnant as a 2-year-old, I start to love them. I think you just have to cull the ones that don't and keep the ones that do. And then if you're going to buy bulls, that's why I say be really careful you select bulls. I mostly raise my own bulls, and I raise them out of the very best cows, the cows that do get pregnant every year, and their calves survive still weaning time and beyond. And the cows that have good udders and good mobility and that sort of thing and have good disposition. So off the bottom end, I'm culling cows that I want to get rid of. At the top end, the very top end, I take the cows that can be the mothers of our future bulls. Now, I hope the seed stock breeder that I buy bulls from is kind of doing that same thing, and that he can pretty much assure me that bull that I buy comes from a cow that's the right kind of a cow. Now, I'm afraid that too many of them can't. And I think as a result, most breeders end up bringing back to their herds via the bulls they buy the very problems that they're trying to cull against.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because the seed stock supplier is not rigorously selecting for the same things, culling against the same things.
In your experience, about what percentage of your cow herd will produce something that you would make into a bull in your herd?
Oh, I'd like to think, and I've never counted it that way, but I'd like to think up to a third.
And do you think most seed stock producers would tell you if you call them and say, hey, I'm looking for this bull that's born in the first cycle to a mom born in the first cycle and generations of that? Do you think most of them would be able to, they have to be able to tell you that. I mean, they have to know that based on their records they're supposed to keep for registered herds. But is that something that they would tell you if you called and asked and said, that's the one I want?
I'm probably being too critical, but I don't think most can do that. I think the good ones whose mindset has become more regenerative in nature and more maternal cow quality, what makes really truly a good cow for a rancher? Well, a really good cow is one that calves every year, keeps her calf alive. It's at least a moderately good calf, that or better. And you never have to doctor her, you never have to touch her, and she's got a good disposition, good udder, and good mobility. To me, that's a good cow. And I hate to say it, but I don't think there's too many EPDs that tell me that about the cows. And then care requirement. I get so aggravated popular press this time of year is telling me how to, or no, not this, earlier than this, last fall was telling me how to winter my bulls so they'll get cows pregnant next summer. If I have to feed those bulls very darn much to keep them in condition, do I want to keep their daughters as replacements? The bulls were the last things we fed, the last things we supplemented or anything. And then if they couldn't pass a BSE next spring, too bad.
Yep. Last thing to get the ice broken for them was a bull,
Yeah,
right? Go lick
right.
snow if you're thirsty.
Yeah, I mean, we'd give bulls a little protein supplement in the winter if they were just on dry grass.
Yep.
But to feed them hay, they were the last ones to get it. I mean, it had to be so tough that everything else can. I mean, that bull never has to gestate, never has to lactate. Got a pretty cushy life. I mean, if he can't make it pretty much on his own, I don't want his daughters as cows.
Well, we've covered land and livestock, and we're going to cover the last of the 3 points under point 2 of a 5-point outline, and we've got about 40 minutes left, so we'll step on the gas, I guess.
Okay, we'll do this real quick, and these are places where people might just take some notes because we can talk a lot more about all of these. But I think continuous improvement of people begins with understanding what I call the manager's job. And that's to create an environment in which people want to excel, not easy, but needs to be done, and then provide the tools, training, and freedom to do it. The freedom to do it is to grant them autonomy. When you see they're doing it and capable, get out of their way, let them do it. It's theirs. Now it's theirs. And that's what people want. That's a better motivator than more salary if you give them the freedom to do the work that they've been asked to do.
Can you talk a little bit about payment? Do you think that you give them the freedom to do what they need to do and then reward them for succeeding on the back end rather than having a base salary that's higher? Reward them for success in doing what you gave them the freedom to do? Is that how you'd approach that?
Oh, I'm either or on that, actually. I think certainly people ought to be adequately paid, and if they do better work, then adequately paid means they should, they should get a better salary. Basically, bonuses. I'd much rather they be kind of profit sharing, so that the owner and the crew, the workers, they share the risks of weather and markets. And if you're making a good profit, why, then it's shared. The owner does deserve the first cut because he's got a terrific investment there that ought to be making some return. And the employee gets paid no matter what, gets paid their salary. And so if you have a profit sharing situation, when you have good profitable years, yes, they did contribute to that, reward them. But you need to understand that it's not a fixed bonus. It's not just an expectation. If the profits aren't as good, you still got your salary. The owner still needs something. And so, if the profits aren't as good, you maybe don't share. So I'm a little bit ambivalent there, but I do believe in good, fair compensation and rewarding people well for the work they do. Now, leadership is best gauged by the voluntary response of those being led. Circle the word voluntary for a reason. If it's not voluntary, it's not leadership. Pushership, coercion, I don't know what you might call it, but it's not leadership. And there's another thing in it, just a quote I heard just a few days ago. It said, "The better leader you become, the more people you're going to be able to help." And I like that. I think that is true. As you become a better and better leader, and it doesn't matter what your position is in the org, where you fit on the org chart, a good leader can influence people to follow their lead. And the better leader you are, the more people you will help. Okay, good planning and decision-making tools. I think you want to have good financial records. You can have an enterprise accounting by cost category and a good separation of direct and overhead costs. I borrow these concepts from the Ranching for Profit schools. I scratch their back a little and they scratch mine in return. They know I do this. And then I like a record of all sales listed separately. Each sale, I don't care if you took one animal to the auction barn and you had sale of one animal, that's a sale. If I sold 500 in a direct contract to some place, that's one sale. And I just want to record that sale. I want to know the number of animals sold, where they were sold, what they weighed, and how much money they brought. I'll enter the stuff I know, and then I can set up a spreadsheet so the computer will calculate the rest of it for me. But if I have that from year to year, a years-long sales record, sure helps me in budgeting as I go forward. What time of the year do they, what do they weigh in the spring? What do they weigh in the fall? What are the prices of cattle in the fall versus the spring or every other season of the year? It's just a good record for our markets to have. And then I want good production records, animal days per pasture and per acre. Because I size paddocks different almost every time, I don't want to do paddock by paddock. I mean, maybe I know how many animal days I took out of it this time, but a long-term comparison doesn't tell me anything. So I'll take the larger pasture that's maybe under a permanent fence or a semi-permanent high-tensile fence, and I'll look at that to record my animal days per acre to see what my trend is over time. Is it going up? Which it better be, and I hope it is. But I'm not gonna do it paddock by paddock when I'm shaping the paddocks different every time I graze them. Then I want to know the weaned calf crop percentage, and I don't get back to cows exposed and all that sort of thing. I just want to know the cows I brought into this year, and I expected them to have a calf. How many of those had a calf? What's that weaned calf crop percentage? Pregnancy rate, same thing. Not how many cows I put with the bulls, but how many cows did I preg check? After I'd done my marketing and whatever I might have done in the summer, how many cows did I preg check? What percent of those were pregnant? Now, for those that do want to compare with their neighbors who take calves weaned per cow exposed, if you take this year's weaned calf crop percentage, multiply it by last year's pregnancy rate, it gives you a very good proxy for that number. Won't be right on, but comes very close. And it's simpler. I just don't like records that take a lot of time. And then I want to know the total pounds weaned, not by the calf, how many pounds weaned out of that herd that year, and the total yearling gain. How much did that whole bunch of yearlings weigh when I shipped them, and what did they weigh when I started with them as yearlings, when I'd weaned them as, what I got for the weaned calf crop weight the year before.
Sure. So on the record of sales listed separately, do you start to see a pattern there and say, hey, we're marketing about this many cull cows every year. Maybe we could shift when we market them and sell them differently. Is that kind of what the record of sales listed separately is communicating?
That's another reason. Like right now, I'm personally involved in a couple of ranches in Wyoming, and we want to end up selling a lot of bred cows because we expose almost every heifer calf that's born on the ranch. And as that pregnancy rate gets better and better year after year, and then too, our grazing management's working pretty good, and so we haven't had these ranches very long, and so as we develop fence and water, we can run more and more cows. So right now, we're needing our own increase in numbers. I don't hope we never max out, but once we get to where we're fairly stable in our numbers and we're using the carrying capacity, and now it's a slower development in our progression of our grazing management, then I want to be able to let bred heifers coming in push bred cows out the other end to sell bred cows. Yeah, and that sales chart helps you with that kind of information. What have you got in each class, and what are you selling in each category, and are we getting there yet?
And then the other thing on this slide, good production records. Would you say it's true that every one of these can be too high and too low? Too high, maybe you're supplementing too much. Too low, maybe you need to supplement more.
Exactly. In other words, if my weaned calf crop percentage, well, let's take pregnancy rate. If my pregnancy rates are say 94, 95, 96, am I going to spend more supplement on 100 head of cows to maybe get one or two more pregnancies? No, I'm not. And I might even let it slide till it's down around 90, 92, 94. Okay, yeah. You can be too high or too low on those. And I don't even know what too high or too low is. It's dependent. It's context dependent. Your context, your place. What does your environment want to support? Yeah, don't let a little lower rate say, hey, feed a bunch more feed. The feed salesman will want to tell you that, but be careful. Now, if my preg rates in most of the places where I've run, if they're down in the 80s, yeah, I'm probably going to try to figure out something. Graze better, feed a little differently, change my calving season. It's not just always more feed, but I'm probably going to try to figure out something. How do I get these preg rates a little better?
And the timing of the feed will probably affect that as much as anything in some cases.
Right. That's why I say calving season, because that affects the timing of the grazed feed, which can make a tremendous difference. Yeah. All these things I've listed here, They help us with data collection, storage, and retrieval. They help us with a lot of things, but I think they make data nerds out of us, if I can say that. And we collect, not all of us, but too many people collect a lot of data that never becomes information and they never use in decision making. And if that's the case, why do you collect it? I hope I don't offend, but I joke with people about the recreational tagging. Why do you tag every calf at birth? Now, if you're a seed stock producer, I can understand why. But if you're a commercial cattle person, why do you tag every calf? What decisions are you going to make with a tag in that calf's ear that you wouldn't make anyway?
The one exception I can think of might be the aged cow, the mature cow who's calved every year in the first cycle and she has a bull calf. You might tag that one.
We tag our elite cows and then we jerk that tag. I mean, we tag cows, okay? So the cows that are elite cows, they have an elite tag until they tell us they shouldn't have it. I like this kind of a format. I got it back in grad school many years ago. Ranching for Profit uses an approach somewhat similar to this, but that setup of your livestock flow, what do you have on the hand in the beginning? What's born? What do you buy? What are your losses? And what do you sell? And then what do you have on hand at the ending? And then how do they change age categories? Yearlings become 2-year-olds, 2-year-olds become cows, and so forth. I take steers, males down the chart, females up the chart. They all start in the middle. But that just helps you envision, and it's, to me, that's the foundation on which you start to build a budget. Okay, war on cost. Why? First of all, you got your overheads. The gross margin is your total revenue plus or minus inventory change minus direct costs. And the gross margin in ranches that don't have to feed very much is a pretty good gross margin. The costs that come, your direct costs are basically feed and vet, which isn't very many costs. So we're very overhead dependent business. And what are overheads? They're land and the things attached to land and people and their tools and equipment. We've got to have overheads, but we sure don't have to have overheads we don't need. And most of us get addicted to overheads. The decision to reduce overheads is a lot easier intellectually than it is emotionally. And cowboys don't like to hear the word emotion, but that's it. We get attached to this stuff. And the ranches that I see that make the most progress the fastest in profitability are the ones that just bite that bullet. They just say, hey, we've got overheads, we've got stuff here we do not need, let's be rid of it. And
if you're not willing to get rid of it, then it can be called a fixed cost. But if you're willing to get rid of it, it can be an overhead.
Yeah, it's an overhead. But why do we have to wage war on costs? Well, because people don't have to eat meat. They're probably going to die young, but they don't have to eat meat. And if they do eat meat, it doesn't have to be beef. I don't want to imagine a life on chicken, but it doesn't have to be beef. And so we have to produce our product. Pick your endpoint. Whatever, are you selling calf or yearling, or are you selling beef directly to consumers, or are you putting them in a custom feedlot? So pick your endpoint. But whatever that endpoint is, we need to sell our product at a price that is attractive to the consumer and profitable to us. Attractive to the consumer and profitable to us, and that can become very, very cost dependent. You know, if our neighbor can produce a pound of calf 10 cents a pound cheaper than we can, they get to stay in business longer. And so, you know, that's really what it boils down to. So how do I get to efficient? You notice that's not TOO, it's two. How do we get there? Match the cow size and calving season to available resources is where you start with that. And that has effects on the stuff in the lower right-hand corner there. Fed feed versus graze feed. In other words, you can have a lot less fed feed and a lot more graze feed if your calving season is right. It'll affect your grazing management, particularly during calving time. It'll affect your carrying capacity. It'll increase it. It'll reduce overheads, calving time labor, calving facilities if your calving season's right. Those in particular. It'll help your herd fertility. So it has a marvelous effect on those things. Cow size, calving season, it's amazing the effects that those two things will have. I want to increase grazing days and reduce feeding days. And then I like minimal development of replacement heifers. We get this story and I read an article just the other day. got to be 65% of expected mature cow body weight. So you need to know what your cows are, and then once your heifers get 65, it'll kill you. It'll kill you. They don't have to be that. I know from years and years of experience, they don't have to be that. These heifers, they're in a circle there because they've just been fed some cake. They're grazing that dry grass. They're fed hay if it gets real cold. They're fed hay if we worry a little about if the snow gets deep. We don't worry too much about their body condition because we're going to feed them enough cube that they're going to be okay for body condition. But if it gets real cold, snow gets real deep, we don't make them graze. But these heifers they're going to be lucky to be 55% of mature cow body weight when the bulls are turned in. But hey, we're picking a calving season where they're going to have plus months of green grass with a lot of compensatory gain before the bulls are turned in. And we haven't spent much money on it. Now, people say you got to get a high percent of pregnancy in your first calf heifers, in your yearling heifers, because it costs so much to develop them. Well, if it didn't cost so much to develop them, then the argument changes. I don't care if only 60 or 70% of these get pregnant. I'll still have enough replacement heifers, and the opens will make good feeder animals and be profitable. The open ones should be profitable every year. They shouldn't have cost you money. They should be profitable. Why are stocker operators profitable? Because they didn't spend too much money in the development of the stocker through the wintertime. That's just kind of the way it is. Your replacement heifer development costs need to stay low to be profitable. A 2-year-old that calves, weans a calf, you sell that calf, and now she's open. And if I sell her at heiferette prices, combination of her sale price and the sale price of the calf that she just weaned should cover her lifetime costs. If you're keeping the cost of the development where it should be, and it will if you're doing it.
Is this piece about the managing the feed costs? Is that more about changing the mindset of I'm feeding cows because I started feeding, now I'm going to feed them every day till we turn them out to green grass, rather than I'm feeding cows when the conditions demand, when their energy requirements are such that they can't meet their energy demand
that's a mindset change that is extremely, extremely important. That you feed the cattle when they need to be fed, truly need to be fed, not because your habit said that's the way you've always done it or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, or that they have to get to 65% of their expected mature cow body weight in order to get pregnant, because they don't have to do that to get pregnant. I know it because I've done it too many times.
Yeah,
with literally thousands of heads. So you cut inputs and then you cull the right cow. You can buy replacement cows that fit your environment, or you can raise replacement heifers from bulls and cows that fit your environment. You can choose that way, whether you're a maternal breeder or a terminal breeder, probably is the choice you're going to make. And just remember, longevity is a result of fertility, and fertility is a result of environmental fit. If they fit your environment, they're going to get bred, and then they're going to live a long time.
But that doesn't mean they have to live at your place for a long time.
Right. I want longevity genetically, because if I'm selling them to somebody else as a replacement cow, and I did a lot of this years ago and sold a lot of bred cows, and the people kept coming back because they liked the cows because they kept getting pregnant for them. Yeah, repeat buyers, two large ones, in fact, that stayed with us for years. Coincidental with good grazing, calving in sync with nature, you'll have bigger herd sizes, fewer herds, which reduces the need for fence and water and labor. Livestock occupying a very small portion of the ranch at any given time, so the rest of it's in recovery, and reduced need for fed feed, which is really important. And that leads to less requirement for labor and equipment and a higher cows per person ratio. And those are drivers of profitability, key drivers of profitability. We're to number 5 already.
Yep. This is the one I was hoping we'd have a little more time to look at today, for sure. So I'm glad we're here by now.
Okay. So an emphasis on marketing, and I think it's really important. Now, we need to pick our endpoint. What are we producing? What are we selling? And we need to think in terms of time, form, and place. What's the best time? What's the best form? And when I say form, a calf, a yearling. If it's a female, is it a bred yearling? Is it an open yearling? It becomes a cow. Do I sell an open cow, a bred cow? And probably you're going to send, in the female side, might be a little bit of each, depending on where you are. Now, we don't sell heifer calves unless they're dogs. Of the livestock classes, they're typically the most undervalued, in relationship to each other. So sell them to yourself, keep them, expose them to bulls. And I know two schools of thought out there that would like to select your replacement heifers for you. They'd like to do it with looking at evidences of hormonal expression. And I think those people are good. I think they know how to do quite a bit of that. Or they like to do it with the genotyping, where they look at the genotype of the heifer and tell you, hey, these will get bred and these won't. Well, I can guarantee you can take either of those approaches, and in the ones that should have got bred, there'll be some that shouldn't, that didn't, and in the ones that shouldn't, there'll be some of those that did. Well, I'm a real believer in time value of money. I need a quick payback. The ones that can get pregnant now, that the bulls and Mother Nature tell me get pregnant, they are the ones that get pregnant. And so I like those heifers. And an open yearling that you expose, her value increased quite a bit over being a calf. And they're a very desirable feeder animal if she's open. And easy to sell, and they will be profitable. Ours were profitable. On the ranch I managed in Nebraska for a good number of years, they were profitable every year. Year after year, the open heifers were profitable. And, we did our enterprise accounting on a basis that we could tell that they were profitable. Pick your endpoint and then learn how to. So time, form, and then place. Well, place is getting to be kind of a difficult thing anymore because of video auctions and online sales and direct marketing. But place, conceptually, there is a place. It might be in your mind, it might be virtual, but it's a place. So pick where you're going to sell. Time, form, and place, and these become important decisions.
My dad and I were just having this conversation the other day that even 70 or 100 miles apart between Belle Fourche Livestock and Belle Fourche, South Dakota, and Faith Livestock and Faith, South Dakota, a Charolais calf will sell better or a Charolais cross calf will sell better in Faith than they will in Belle Fourche. Is that kind of what you're talking about with place?
That kind of stuff, you learn that those kind of things happen. Yes. And then when it comes to place, that's what you're picking. Or you might know an order buyer, and that's a place. And he might know differences between people for whom he's buying in a direct sales situation. So I cut inputs. I want short exposure of heifers. And right now, there are operations I'm on in Wyoming. We need the cattle so badly. We're exposing them for 2 cycles, but I really like to get to someplace between 24 and 30 days of exposure. The only reason I'd go beyond 24 is because I know bull exposure sometimes gets cattle ready to come into heat. And if you go 30 days, well, you're probably going to give them that chance. But if I can get enough in 24, that's what I like. And then the open heifers make good feeders, as I've already said. The pregnants make good cows. Now, cows, I want a short calving season, a long breeding season. And you say, what? Well, we'll talk just a little bit. I leave the bulls and the cows until preg check time. I'm going to tell you some things I did, and there could be a lot of differences for what other people might do, because I've shared these ideas with other people, and then for their context, where they were and knowing their markets, they took them beyond and made my ideas even better for their location, for where they were. But we left the bulls with the cows until preg check time. And when people did the preg checking, we said, we were calving April and May. And we said, if you think the pregnancy occurred after the 1st of September, she's open, regardless if she's pregnant or not. She's open on our books. And that's where our preg rate's calculated. She's on the open side. She's not on the pregnant side. Call her open. Well, they could tell there were some pregnant. We knew there were probably more because the bulls came out the same day the cows were preg checked, because it was the easy time to get them out.
Yeah.
I've also learned that it's a lot easier to tend a bunch of bulls in a cow herd than it is in a bachelor bunch. And the later you go into the year, the easier the bachelor bunch is to tend. They're satisfied with life. They know that there's not much more work to do. They were open cows. Well, then what do? We take those cows, all the opens, and we set them aside. We were in Nebraska. We take them to corn stalks on the Platte River, again, and into those same cows about Thanksgiving time, we would put bulls with them again. And they were bulls we called last year bulls. In other words, we weren't going to use them again. We'd take them there and get them pretty close to where they could market on the Platte River and put them with the cows. And then about not very many days later, about mid-December, we would preg check those cows. Now, the ones that had got pregnant in the last 15 days, we couldn't diagnose that pregnancy. But any of those cows that were pregnant, and quite a few of them were, those were going to be June, July calvers. And like I say, we developed a market for a guy who wanted June and July calvers. And he bought them year after year. And he'd take them right, as we'd preg them, he'd take them away, haul them home. And the remainder of those cows then stayed there until about the 1st of March. And the cornstalk guys want you off by about the 1st of March. And then we'd preg again. And then we'd have fall calvers. And we sold those pregnant cows to a sister ranch in Oklahoma.
And they worked well in that environment.
They worked. I never liked the preg rates. We didn't get the preg rates there that we'd get in Nebraska. But they still figured it was a cheap replacement, a lot cheaper replacement than developing and raising their own. And they'd breed in the high 80s, where in Nebraska we would be in the 90s.
And this is an example of, you're moving them, continuing to move them east where there's more and more market for those mature cull animals. And that's kind of what you're talking about, being place. Marketing place is important as well, right? Right.
So the place became important. But between those two activities, we didn't sell very many open cows. Now we had our out and out culls. I mean, you wouldn't sell to anybody as a bred cow, even if she was bred, just a horrible udder, or I mean, she's just getting so old, or she's starting to get decrepit because of age, doesn't look good, or is lame, or got a bad eye, etc. Those cows they went to cull. And that's what we tried to sell them while they were still reasonably healthy, so they didn't have to be condemned, or the auctioneer worrying about their fitness, but those had to be sold. Now, get to next spring, and we started calving in April, and if the cow hadn't calved by the last day of April, we sorted off the ones that hadn't calved of each of our herds, and we had quite a number of herds, and we put them all together in one group, and we bred them to calve in May because they were calving in May this year anyway. Bred them to calve in May, and we had another buyer that would buy them off the end of the preg chute that fall. So we'd wean the calf and then sell the cow immediately as a bred cow. No, the ones that were open, naturally, he didn't sell as a bred cow, but he'd buy them off the preg chute and haul them away that evening or the next morning.
You were starting to calve early in April, and then anything that hadn't calved by the end of April, you're selling the next fall as a May calving cow.
Right. And I don't know how the number fell out, but it tend to average over a period of years, about 87% of the cows would calve in the first 30 days in the month of April. Now, naturally, they were breeding to calve at the 1st of April, so you'd always get a few that were earlier than that.
Sure.
But our cutoff date was end of April, 1st of May.
But that's under this regime of management where you're leaving the bulls in till preg check time.
Right.
And so you've got this long breeding season, short calving season.
Exactly. And you just shorten the calving season by your marketing and your culling, and you end up being able to sell a lot of bred cows at a very nice premium. I mean, they brought a lot more money than the open cows did. If we just pulled the bulls at the end of 40 days or so and said, and we want the short calving season. So that's what we were working at with our marketing.
And so the biggest piece of your marketing then is not necessarily, well, I mean, a big piece of marketing, or the mindset shift of the marketing, is marketing cows and bred females rather than we're only going to focus on how we market our calves.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to be a maternal breeder, the only way you're going to compete with a terminal person is if you can develop the heifers inexpensively and then sell a lot of bred cows at a premium. Now, that also fits the direct marketers, people who can find a direct market, because your open or dries, 2s, 3s, and 4-year-olds can all work into that meat market. You have to do a little bit of work for quality assurance, make sure you're okay with that aging, but that can all move nicely, easily into your meat marketing. And so, I'd be rid of the steers at a younger age in one way or another, whether they're in my direct market or I sell them outside and then focus on the females to be in my direct meat marketing. And I know people who do that. They sell all the steers away, and then their females are what make their direct meat market sales for them. And you just categorize so you can keep group sizes fairly large and fairly uniform, and then just move them to the next step in your program.
So we've covered the 5 essentials. Kind of as we point towards wrapping up, what are some of the things you're thinking about?
Well, I've got 2 summary slides, and we can spend as much time on either one as you'd like. The first one is, again, points we've already talked about: adapted cows, calving season, grazing management. Those 3 things work together. I mean, if you play with one, you're going to have to probably play with the other a little bit. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
Yep.
That those 3 things, and then they're going to have marvelous effects on soil health, carrying capacity, and one of those drives the other to quite an extent. Fed feed versus grazed feed. In other words, how much can I graze and how much do I have to feed? Then they'll have an effect on overheads, particularly labor and facilities, and then on herd fertility. If your cows are better adapted to what you're doing, your environment, the fertility is just going to be better. If the calving season is right, you can be too late or you can be too early, but herd fertility can sure be affected by being kind of spot on with that. So they just work together.
Yeah. Very good. Helpful summary.
And then I tell people, sometimes I'll show this slide here very early in a presentation. I tell people, if you can fully understand this, we can all go home now because you've got it figured out. But I'm not sure I fully understand this. I just know that it's right. Mm-hmm. Reduce overheads as much as possible. Achieve excellent herd fertility. Market well. Do that and then improve 3 key ratios. And these ratios are really, really important. Acres per cow. We want that number to be lower. In other words, talked about the guy in Montana. He'd moved from 30 acres per cow to 16. That's a marvelous change. Think about that. He told me doing that, he did not have to add 1 pickup, 1 saddle horse, 1 hired employee, 1 side-by-side or 4-wheeler. Didn't have to add any of that. He said the only thing we had to add is on cow working days, and he said that never exceeds 5 days per year. On cow working days, we either have to stay longer, which we prefer not to do, or we trade for more neighbor help. So we have to go to neighbors more days to get more neighbors to come to our place to help us, or just hire the day help. But think, that's just not a very big cost. And yet he's running twice as many cows.
Yeah, that's the second ranch didn't cost very much.
Yeah. Well, that's the next point. He told me that he had spent about $50 an acre for stock water development and for fence and fence materials. And he said, when I multiplied that by the number of acres we had, he said, I didn't. I knew it right to begin with. Because when you multiply by the numbers of acres, that seems like a lot of money. And he said, it was kind of a lot of money. But he said, where in Montana do I buy a ranch for $50 an acre? And I don't even have to pay property tax on this one.
Yeah.
You want to think of all the other things that get easier. I've got more cows on the same land space, so I don't have to chase more country, see more country, etc. The only mistake he made is he underdeveloped his water, and he doesn't use barber tanks. He makes his own, and they're similar to the barber tank, the concept. He can pick them up and move them.
Yep.
And he knew he had enough water if he multiplied the GPM by 1,440, which is the number of minutes in a day, by the way.
Okay.
Multiply GPM by 1,440. He said he should have watered those cows, but he said they wanted to drink in the daytime, and he said they were standing around waiting for water. And he said, when I finally got these tanks and put them out there and I could collect the nighttime flow, and then the cattle come drink in the water time in the daytime, why then they had water. They could still have the inflow coming, but at the same time they could drink down the storage.
So he was pumping it to a large tank up somewhere up top and then gravity feeding it?
He was taking this right to where the cattle were. The tank very similar to the barber tank.
I see. Okay.
Take it right to where the cattle were, and so that's how he would use it. It was right there where the cattle were. And he said, the day's coming though. He said, we're adding cows all the time because of our grazing management. So the day's coming, I'm either going to have to lay another small line or just replace it with a bigger a bigger line. So my caution to everybody, just count on at least 3x the number of cattle that you currently run when you develop your stock water. And it is not the size of the drinking area. You know, it's an amazing how a fairly small tank will water lots and lots of cattle. They are willing to take their turns. That just seems to be pecking orders established.
Yeah.
They seem to be just happy to wait their turn, go there and drink. But if they do go there to drink and there's not water there, they go crazy.
Yeah.
And that will hurt their performance for quite a long time, I am sure. They're just nuts. They won't leave water very far for fear there won't be water next time they get there. And it does bad things to them for quite a while. So the rule is never run out of water. There's got to be enough recharge that the cows that stand around that tank can't take it to the bottom. But there will always be water there when the next cow comes to drink.
Yep. And it will be, like you said, it'll be long time where they will have that kind of panicked approach to drinking water if you let that happen.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience.
And sad but true, it'll probably happen sometime, but boy, you sure don't want it to. And in water systems, stock water systems, build in as much redundancy as is reasonably cost effective.
Yep.
Okay, next ratio, cows per FTE. That's full-time equivalent of labor. Now, I like to run, and there was a lot of things that drove this number, but it's not that important. I worked with a lot of cow herds, about 800 to 900 cows in a herd. And one guy took care of those, plus usually a herd of yearlings. And he took care of all of his fence work around that. And so, whether it was permanent fence or temporary fence or whatever, if that can happen, and let's say you're a small rancher and you just run 200 cows, I think to be competitive, you just have to say, okay, those cows probably only deserve about a quarter of my time. So what can be my other source of income? And then with that, how can I grow this so it can take my full time? Now that's not to say you've got to be 800 cows. I think someplace, I don't know where the number is, but with today's market, it's easier and quicker. But let's say over time, I'm going to say someplace between 300 and 600 cows, depending on your situation, will pay a full-time salary.
Yep. And I talking to some people who are working on ranches structured this way, they kind of do the same thing where they share labor on the big days, and they call in other people and they do the work together on the big days of the year, like you said, about 5 days a year, and then they go and help on the other places on the other days.
Do we have time for a short story, or do we not?
That's your schedule is the one I'm trying to respect. So,
well, a couple that I worked with in Missouri, and those were the heifers that I first showed on that Missouri slide, Steve and Judy Freeman, and I just have the greatest respect for them. They're excellent grazers, but I've heard it out of both their mouths. But what else do I have to do today? Once you've got your water infrastructure and your fencing infrastructure kind of in place, the question is, other than going to those cattle, and if you're going to move them that day, move them or check on them, what else do you have to do that day? Maybe check the fence and water ahead of them, make sure it's going to be okay when the cattle get there. But what else do you have to do that day? You've reduced your overheads to the minimum. You shouldn't have barns and buildings and corrals that need a lot of work and fix up. And I mean, there will be a little of that naturally through time. But I asked Judy how long it took her to move her cows, because she moves them most of the time. She said, "Well, I'm the animal breeder here," and she said, they sell some bulls. She said, "I like to see every cow and every calf walk past me, look at their health, the degree of gut fill, and so forth." And she said, "So I take more time than I need to. But what else do I have to do today?" She said, "Now, if I have an appointment in town," she said, "a half an hour, I can show up, I can build a new fence, move the cattle into a new paddock, and be gone in 20 minutes. but I don't, and I don't want to. But if I had to, I could. Steve was out showing me a pasture one day, and he was digging a trench, and I said, "What's this trench for?" He said, "Oh," said, "we're getting older." And he said, I can't imagine doing anything else for as long as I live and have decent health. And he said, but I might not want to work quite as hard. And so he said, I'm putting in a pipeline and some stock tanks along it. He'd previously to that been using portable water where he had a faucet and then he'd move his water tanks and drag hose to the water tank. And I'd say, well, don't you like the portable water anymore? So no, I liked the portable water. I liked what we could do with it. But he said, I don't think I'm going to like having to use it as I get older. And so said, when we've got a little time, he said, we just do it. What else have I got to do?
Yep.
Okay. And then the next one, fed feed versus graze feed. And that is a huge driver. And I hope all of you understand that. The more days I can graze a cow in a year and the less days I have to feed her. Now, I'm not talking about supplemental feed. I'm talking about substitute feed. I'm feeding in place of grazing. The more profitable you're going to become. But those three ratios they're hugely powerful.
Yeah, I think those are very understandable numbers too. And again, kind of back to where we started, a mindset shift about just because I'm running 200 cows doesn't mean they need every day of my time.
Hopefully they better not need every day of your time.
Right, exactly. Burke, anything else? I really appreciate your time today.
I think not. We just encourage you to visit UA once in a while, and we can explain these ideas with a lot more clarity and a lot more broadly.
Very good. Burke, thanks for your time today.
You bet. My pleasure.
Very good stuff there with Burke, as always. Of course, just a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and really appreciate him taking the time to join me today on the Working Cows podcast and share some of those things. So very much looking forward to this next episode with Bart Carmichael and Pat Guptill. They are educators and ranchers here in Western South Dakota doing really good work here locally, but also expanding some of that influence out more broadly. And so we're going to talk to them about some of the lessons they've learned. Both of them have been on a shared regenerative journey over the last number of decades, actually. Both of them have more than a decade under their belt of making these changes, and they've each kind of been each other's mentors. And so really unique relationship there with those two, and look forward to sharing that conversation with you coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.